Hello viewers, this is Frank Perrin. Welcome back to Al-Asad, and today I'm here to go on a little bit of a ramble and rant about something that I've been meaning to go on for a very long time, and it's something that was very, very near and dear to me, and that is rambling on about Eurocentrism, and especially how Eurocentric ideas and views on armor and weapons kind of permeate a lot into pop culture, specifically that in terms of YouTube arms and armor videos. Okay, and the what I'm going to pinpoint on this for today is the example of the use of leather. Now I know what you're saying, Frank. This is always done. People always talk about leather armor, but what they're not addressing of it is the nuance of leather armor and how when people debate the use of leather armor or its existence, they look at it from European perspective and they make a lot of very broad statements about leather armor and its existence. And sometimes I hear something as wild as it didn't exist, which drives me up a wall because it does exist. But here's where it may not exist: Europe. Which is also not true because leather was used heavily in things like, gaps in armor or used in brigandines and splinted armor, things like that. But we're going to look at the broad statements here, right? And they always say that things like full breastplates made of leather are fantasy and they're not real, and full arm guards of leather are not real, and though they weren't used, and they will pinpoint European sources as where this statement is drawn from, right? But they're ignoring or not even thinking about the countless other cultures outside of Western Europe where leather armor was not only used but highly developed. And leather work in these regions were remarkable. And there's still full suits of leather armor that survive to this day, pretty well preserved. Okay, so one example of this is in Central Asia and in the Middle East. There is a huge favoritism towards using hardened leather in things like rhino hide, in things like separs and dolls, right? You even see in parts of Georgia, right? You'll have small bucklers that are hardened leather, just like this one, right? And things like rhino hide, when you harden them, are extremely, extremely tough. And then when you reinforce it, right, with like steel in certain areas, you've got a really tough, durable shield that might actually take a beating in ways that steel shields might actually not be able to take, right? So hardened leather shields absolutely existed in the Middle East, Central Asia. Some of them existed in Northern Africa, the rest of Africa, right? Places where access to steel and wood may not be that achievable. So leather shields, hard leather shields, absolutely existed, but really not in the way that like people might think they existed. So I'm going to go up on the screen. I'm going to put a few examples of some leather shields. Okay, but what about the armor that you wear? Surely there weren't full suits of leather armor anywhere. That's where you're wrong. Because not only do we have surviving pieces, but we have historical text and accounts to back this up. So from parts of Eastern Europe to Persia, Mongolia, China, right, Tibet, there's a type of armor that was heavily used made from leather, and that is lamellar, right? Leather lamellar armor is very common in many places, and it only makes sense that you would be able to make lamellar out of leather because if you're someone who, for example, is like a steppe nomad, right, or you have to be on the go, right? You need, maybe you can't afford steel, right? Maybe in some places actually leather might actually be really costly because it takes a lot of time, right, to cut these lanes. You got to run it through. Someone has to make this suit, right? So depending on some regions, it might be cheaper, but some regions it might be more expensive. But either way, you have areas where you have access to lots and lots and lots of animals, especially if you are nomadic or you are herders, right? You have access to all of this leather, so why not use it? We have one of the most famous examples of this from the Metropolitan Museum of Art is actually a Persian charanier made of hardened leather. There is also an example of um, leather lamellar from Tibet that survives in its entirety, I think minus the shoulders, that the Metropolitan Museum of Art has. And that is really just the beginning. There's other examples of leather lamellar that they actually have over in Yale right now, I believe it is, that came from the Sasanian period in Syria, right? You have hardened leather helmets from northern Africa. And this makes sense because of the animal access and use of hides, right? And probably didn't pop up in Europe the same way it did in other places, right? Because animals oftentimes, you know, they weren't needed to craft leather armor at that point, right? Because Europe had very, very rich soil, and for a very, very long time, you had access to really good quality soil to use to draw your iron ore from, and then to eventually make steel, right? In other parts of the world, you may not have had necessarily that much access to good quality iron ore, so you're going to use other materials to supplement for that, right? So Europe also had a different relationship with its animals and may not have had the abundance of them to make leather armor out of like you would in other parts of the world. So with that in mind, let's be a little more careful when watching these YouTube channels that make these giant broad statements about leather and their use in the medieval world and how leather armor didn't exist. And you can look at things such as like accounts when encountering the Mongols, right? There are primary source accounts where both Europeans and Chinese describe the lamellar worn by the Mongols as leather scales. So, whether you like it or not, leather armor very much exists. It's very much real. It was used commonly. There's surviving examples today. I'm going to tell you what, too. I wear this to fight in a lot, and there are times I actually prefer this. The idea of a leather armor over top with like my zera or mail underneath, I like that feeling. I think that's a really comfortable compromise between protection and mobility. There are a lot of ways where I think leather is a superior style of armor to use, and it definitely has its pros and its cons like anyone else. And if it survived in that part of the world, like up till like the 1700s in some places, like in Tibet, then clearly it worked and clearly it was real. So my thing is going forward, just to try to make sure that we're taking these comments with a grain of salt and we're looking at the things that were stated about these parts of the world, these broad statements, and really looking at the context and the evidence that we have for it. So hope you enjoyed this video. At some point, I'm actually going to be throwing together another video that piggybacks off of some of these other YouTube videos. Talk about what would this adventurer wear, what would that adventurer wear, and videos from channels like like Scholar Grimm, Living in Anachronism, right? They have these great videos that hypothesize what certain warriors or rangers would wear. Um, that would optimize their loadouts. But no one's really looked at what maybe characters from a desert setting might do or might wear um, in the fantasy world, right? Think about the fun combinations you can do with like leather armor or like maybe a cool looking helmet with a turban wrapped around it, and thinking about all the different weapons across the ages from the Middle East that you can incorporate. So be on the lookout for a video that kind of discusses what would a fantasy adventure in a Middle Eastern or Central Asian setting wear. All right, well, with that in mind, hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time on Al-Asad, House of the Lion. Thank you.